Hi guys, today's tutorial is how I draw black fur in pastels. So first off, I just want to say I really hope everyone's having a good Christmas despite everything that's going on in the world. I wasn't going to upload a video today, seeing that it's Boxing Day, but I thought Christmas is going to be a bit different this year, so why not? I enjoy making the videos, so I thought there might be people that necessarily aren't celebrating Christmas in the same way this year, so that's why I thought I'd go ahead and upload as normal. Okay, so let's start off with the tutorial. So I always start off with the eye, mainly because the eye is so important. You know, it's the soul of the portrait. It's the main part of that makes that dog that dog. It's capturing all that expression. Especially here with Alfie's portrait, there was lovely reflection because it was taken on a really nice bright day, so you got the nice reflection from the sky. If you don't get the eye right, I find the portrait's just not right, so I tend to start there first just to make sure that that's all in okay. So basically, as with all my other portraits that you've seen, I start by blocking in my base layer. So what I do for this is I sand down some soft pastel sticks on some sandpaper, and I then mix some colours on the sandpaper or on a separate piece of paper with my Sofft Tool, which I've got here, and then I directly apply that mixed colour to my Pastelmat paper. Now this is one of the reasons why I don't list and tell you the exact colours that I'm using for a portrait, because I mix them on the paper exactly like how I would acrylic paint on a palette. So as long as you've got your depth and your tone, your lights light enough and your darks dark enough, the colour will come with more practice. The more you pick up your pencils, you'll know what colours to lay down. So a good tip for making sure you can better judge your values is to put your darker tones in first. So like above Alfie's eye, that's dark, and that dark shadow down by his ear. Once you've got your darkest values in, it then enables you to better judge your mid-tones and your highlights, because what you'll tend to find is if you put your highlights in first and then your shadows next to it, once you've got your shadows where you want it, your lights are nowhere near light enough. So get your darker values in first and then work from there. So once I've got my base layers roughly blocked in, that's when I'll start going back with my pastel pencils. Now because of the way that I apply the soft pastel with a soft pastel stick, there is still loads of tooth of the paper left. So there are plenty of space to add more layers, add more detail, which I love Pastelmat for that. I've never reached a point where I can't add layers on top of my base layers when applying it this way. Now you can, if you use the soft pastel sticks directly to the paper, depending on how much pressure you put on that soft pastel stick, you can fill up the tooth of the paper really quickly, and what will happen is your pencils will almost glide over the pigment, and it's almost like the pastel cannot grip to that paper, and that is because you've filled the tooth of the paper. Now when that happens, your only real option is to apply a workable fixative to give you some detail, to give you some tooth back to the paper so that you can add more detail on top. So it's best to avoid that if you can, and I find layering the base foundations with the soft pastel and the Sofft Tools the best way that works for the way that I like to work. So once you're happy with your base layers, that's when you start going back with your pastel pencils like what I'm doing here, paying really close attention to your reference photo and really following the direction of the fur. So Alfie's, the pose and the angle of his head, he's looking more to one side and his ear is down. So that is going to change how the muscular structure and how it forms the shape of his head will be different to how you might normally expect the fur direction to be. So pay really close attention to that detail and follow the direction of that fur really closely. If you don't follow that direction of the fur, you won't capture the structure of the dog, and it will ultimately, it will make your perspective look wrong, and it just won't end up looking as much like that dog. So when people look at my portraits, I want them to say, that looks like Alfie, that doesn't just look like a black Labrador. So going in, always making sure you've got a nice sharp pencil, especially for these details here where I'm overlapping the subject onto the background. And they're just reinforcing the darker shadows. Going in with my brightest one, this is now a Carbothello white. If you want really white highlights, I find that the Caran Chinese white pastel pencil is the best for that, but because it is a thicker lead and a softer lead, you can struggle to get a fine point and therefore get as finer details on top. But it is a lovely pencil. So black fur is one of my favourite things to draw or paint. I absolutely love it. You don't just often use black, you mix your black with blues, purples to create a deeper, much more intense black so that it's not as flat. So on my my paper there that I've sanded down, I will always, when I've got black fur on the, for my subject, I will make sure that I've sanded down some blues, purples, so that I can mix that in with my black so that it is not just straight black. That will make such a difference to making your artwork that much more 3D, have that much more depth. When drawing something like Alfie, the biggest thing is making sure you put the lights in the right place and the darks in the right place. So this photo, as I said, has really strong lighting. It was beautiful. It had a lot of detail for me to capture, and it's not your typical pose. You'd normally see the dog would be looking more at the camera, but this was lovely. He had a really nice smile in it. It was just, I really enjoyed working on this, and as I say, especially because it was the black fur, which I always love capturing. This was one where I didn't want to put my pencils down. So when I am drawing a black dog, black cat, whatever it would be, I would probably tend to go with either the grey, the warm grey Pastelmat, or the blue, and there's also a light grey as well. That is because that's basically put down a mid-tone colour for you. So here you can see on the bridge of the nose, I've only had to add a very lighter shade to the already base colour there from the Pastelmat paper. So they would be my preferences because it makes it that much easier to judge your values right from the beginning. And as I've said before, I always do my backgrounds first, and that's so that it doesn't look like your subject has just been placed on top. You want to make sure that your subject is part of that background, and a big part of making sure you achieve that is by getting these really fine details on the edge of the, like on the eyebrows, the ears, and that those really subtle details overlap onto the background. So I work on a tablet with my reference photo on, and what I'm doing is every single time you see me picking up a different colour, every time you see me change direction with the fur, I am looking at my reference photo all the time, always glancing at it, because the amount of times you'll be drawing something and you'll notice, your brain will think that it knows where your pencil needs to put those marks, but that is often not the case. Pay really, really close to attention, never guess. Always make sure that it's right next to your drawing so that you're not having to look too far away. You want to make sure you can glance at your reference photo and quickly look straight back at your artwork so that you know exactly where you're putting your pencil marks. So as you can see, it is very much a layering process. Once I've got the main part of Alfie's in here, I then made a start on his nose, and this is just purely how I work from the top left corner where I'm right-handed. I'll then work my way down to the right, and that's purely so I'm not resting the glassine or anything over the pastel. So as I said, if you are struggling to get your values, it tends to be a good way of starting off is blocking in your darker areas first. So Alfie's nose here was one of the darker areas, so by putting this in first, the eyebrow and the ear, you can then better judge your values. But because, as I say, this was that much further across on the paper, I decided to leave this until I got to it, purely so that I didn't smudge anything. So noses is one of those things where they can be really difficult sometimes. So if you are struggling to draw anything like this, turn your artwork upside down and your reference photo upside down, and it will force your brain to see just the pure shapes and forget the fact that you're drawing a nose. Because so many times our brain thinks we know what a dog's nose looks like, of course we do, but every single one will be different. The details, the highlights, where the shadows are, the nostril shape, that everything will be different. So if you are struggling with that, turn your artwork upside down. So because of the angle of Alfie's head, his nose was in quite a lot of shadow, so you don't have to add detail there if it's not there, because you can in some instances. Obviously if you've got a reference photo that isn't the best quality, you will have to add some details and some variation in the fur to make your artwork better than that photo. But in this instance, if I was to add highlights on his nose that weren't there, it would draw your attention to his nose, which because of the position of his head, there just isn't that highlight and that the light catching the very front of the nose, it's all reflecting off that top section. So you draw it as it is. This was a really good reference photo, and usually what will make for a really good photo or a bad photo is the lighting. If the lighting is there, you can usually work with it and add the details accordingly, as long as you've got other references to work from. But if you have one photo and you're attracted to that photo to use it purely because of the lighting, it's usually because it's the lighting that creates that draws you to it. So that is always usually going to be my preference, and that was certainly the case with Alfie's photo here. So I've mentioned it before, so my base layers on the portraits, they never really look messy, and it's because I make sure that I am really careful with the base layers with the soft pastel sticks and the Sofft Tools, because I think it helps you to add your details on top. If you've already got an accurate foundation, rather than going in with one solid colour, I think this definitely I find I work far better in this way, because you can break it down in sections easily. Like here around by the nose, you can work on the darker bit, then you can work where the whiskers come out, then you can work on the shadow below it, below the eye, on top of his mouth. So you can just easily break it down rather than it looking one solid colour and then you're thinking, well, where's this bit go, where's that bit go. Making sure your foundations are in first will help to make sure that your portrait's perspective and your tones, your shape, they're all in the right place. And as I've said before, don't be tempted at this stage to put the whiskers in, because when you come down to add, to work on the mouth, the tongue and the fur underneath, you'll be having to work around the whiskers, and that's just a nightmare. So try and leave those until the very end. So over my mid-tones there, I had to make that bit slightly darker, because when I was adding the light pencil there on the section above it, I noticed that I hadn't have made this bit that much, it wasn't dark enough. So I mixed a bit of a darker colour on my bit of sandpaper next to me, and then applied that to the paper, ready for my lighter pencils to go on top. And you can see now I'm starting to work back on the area that I did earlier in the video, and that's because now that I've got my values next, the base colours next to it in place, I noticed that that bit wasn't light enough, the same as what I'm doing there. So here you are, making this bit that much darker with my pastel pencil, because this again was one of the other parts of the portrait that was really dark. So using my Carbothellos here. My Carbothellos and the Pastel Pitt pencils are probably my favourite. You can get a really nice point, and you can see that point there on that pencil. That's purely from me using a blade and then filing it down on a bit of sandpaper. I do find that gives me the best sharp, the best crisp point for these really fine details. I hope this video was useful. Don't forget to give the video a like if it was of use. Now coming up, I've had a request to draw a dog's mouth, so I actually thought Alfie here would make for a perfect tutorial for that as well. So as you can see here, there was loads of detail that I could add. Now this was only an A4 size portrait, but I was able to get a nice amount of detail here, so that is going to be a tutorial coming up on how I tackled this mouth. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the new voiceover content, and give the video a like. It really does help. It's really appreciated. Hit the bell button as well if you'd like to get notifications of new content, and I will next be uploading a video on Tuesday. Don't forget to pop any suggestions in the comments below of future content, any topics that you'd quite like me to cover. Pop it in the comments and I will add that on my list to make videos of. Thank you, bye!